is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Authorities in southern African countries struggle to mitigate damage as dozens are feared dead. Investigators return to Ethiopia after reviewing black box data in France. And UN envoy calls for the formation of new government in DR Congo. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi, also coming up in the programme. In business, Egypt posts the fastest growth in tourism and ahead of the global average. And in sports, the world's best squash players converge on Cairo for lucrative Black Ball Squash Open. We begin in southern Africa, where a cyclone and floods have ravaged parts of Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe. Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique late on Thursday and moved westwards into Zimbabwe and Malawi, affecting more than 1.5 million people in the three nations. Mozambique's President Filipe Nyusi has warned that the cyclone may have killed more than 1,000 people in his country, but officials put the death toll at 157 across Mozambique and Zimbabwe.
This is the aftermath of Cyclone Idai. Vast areas of land have been flooded, roads destroyed, and communications disrupted. The president of Mozambique has been visiting one of the flooded cities.
We have put rescue means in place and we asked our friends for more. We have rescue equipment, volunteers and doctors arriving now in Maputo. Answering to the questions on why are foreigners coming here, it's because they know how to deal with these situations and they're not charging us for their support.
In Zimbabwe, the government has declared a state of disaster in areas affected by the storm. Districts like Chimanimani has been cut off from the rest of the country by the torrential rains and winds. The situation in Malawi is no different. The country is prone to deadly flooding during the rainy season.
The government has provided food. It is also providing shelter, and in collaboration with some partners, also trying to provide some water, tents, and even medication to the people that have been displaced.
Aid agencies and authorities from the three countries are working around the clock to help mitigate the damage. South Africa has also sent military aircraft and medical personnel to help in Malawi and Mozambique. Cyclone Idai is said to be the worst to hit the southern African region. In February 2000, Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique, killing 350 people. 650,000 people were left homeless across southern Africa. Chomgono, CGTN.
Well, earlier we spoke to Uloj Ishimwe on the phone about the humanitarian situation in the three southern nations. He is the Africa Region Communications Manager at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies.
The magnitude of damage has been massive. The destruction has been horrifying. Our team on the ground that arrived a few days ago sent back reports that are very scary. They arrived via helicopter because, of course, at that time, the normal flights had been cancelled and it was not possible to reach the affected area via road. Yeah, so we are at the beginning of the rescue operation in terms of cooperation with various partners, but of course the government and the aid workers. So there's the UN and the Red Cross working with the aid workers, and more importantly, the Mozambican Red Cross volunteers, which had actually mobilized its own teams even before the landfall. And they started by conducting early warning, advising communities of the possible impact of the cyclone and advising them on what to do. So we are still doing assessments The initially anticipated scale, I think, is going to be huge after the landfall of the cyclone. And you may also recall that this landfall that happened in the night of Thursday leading to Thursday morning happened after days of heavy rainfall and storm and floods that had also already caused significant impact in terms of displacement of people, where we're talking about 17 people had already been displaced. So in terms of what should happen, so of course there's a need to do search and rescue, to look for survivors, to look for those who may not have survived, to look for people who have survived so that we can give emergency help, including giving them where they can sleep, what they can eat, if they need medical treatment, to provide it. And I would like to say that also the impact of this cyclone will be felt long after it's gone, not least because floodwaters have washed away crops. This is another situation that is going to lead to food insecurity or hunger at a very scary level in the country.
Well, for more on this situation, we are now joined by CGTN's Farai Wakatuya, who is in Chimanimani in Zimbabwe. Farai, what is the latest in that district, and which has been devastated by Cyclone Idai?
Indeed, Karen, massive destruction that has been witnessed in this district. But fortunately, there has been a break in the weather and an improvement in the weather conditions, so much so that rescue efforts, rescuers, our military who are leading this effort have been able to clear out some of the roads and access some of the areas that have been impacted the most. And we understand that they are now able to go into those areas and are rescuing people. However, as they do that, the real magnitude of this disaster is then, comes to the forefront, which is why we continue to see the death toll going higher and higher. Last we heard it was at 92, but we expect that it will go higher as the rescuers are able to go deeper and deeper into the worst affected areas. President Emmerson Mnangagwa, in addition to declaring this district, this area, a state of national disaster, last night addressed the nation and diverted the strategic national grain reserves, that all those reserves must now be diverted to this district to provide food aid to the people who are obviously have been displaced and will be in need of food aid. So it is a rescue effort that is underway, but clearly still a lot more work to do.
And Farai, can you give us an update on the rescue operations there and who is involved in these operations?
Well, it's all being coordinated by the Civil Protection Unit, which is a department of government that is responsible for mounting emergency and relief efforts. And they have roped in the army, the police, all civic society organizations have also been brought on board, those with the expertise to be able to come in, to go into those areas, to pull out people who have survived and who are still marooned, to pull out people, unfortunately, who may have lost their lives, to set up shelters and command centers for people who need shelter, who have been displaced and will need assistance. Earlier on our way here, I actually passed through what is meant to be the shorter route to Chimanimani, but an entire, the whole highway has been washed away, if you can imagine. So there's no road, no access whatsoever. And I spoke to one of the villagers who had crossed the river and made his way onto the other side, and he said that there's a very desperate, dire situation that is unfolding in that area. He says that, a lot of what's reported are the major bridges and roads that have been washed away, but there are smaller bridges, smaller access roads that have been washed away, that he says, he knows of families whose homes have been completely washed away, have disappeared. He spoke about the need for medical attention, that when people go to the hospitals or the clinics, those who've been injured, there aren't any drugs there, and where people need to be referred to the major hospitals in Mutare, for instance, because this road has been damaged, they are unable to do that. So he said he appreciates what the government is doing, but says that there's a lot more that needs to be done, food that needs to be brought in for people who are now starving, who don't have any food, people who are trapped, who are seeking refuge in mountains, up in trees. So clearly the rescue effort has intensified now because the weather has improved significantly, but there is a lot more work to do. And indeed, a lot of Zimbabweans we are seeing bringing in aid, donating, doing all they can support this very, dramatic and desperate unfolding situation.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Farid Wakatuya there in Chimam Imani in Zimbabwe. We now have Daniel Arap Moi on the line. Daniel is in Malawi. Daniel, Malawians are counting their losses from these devastating floods. What is the situation like where you are?
Well, thank you very much. Malawi indeed is counting losses from the devastating floods that affected especially the southern part of this country. We've been going around to the different areas. We've visited so far about 3 districts of southern Malawi. And what we actually see here is a total devastation. People have lost their property, they have lost their farmland, they have lost virtually everything. There is nothing that is left. So majority of those that have lost their property are gathered in several started makeshift areas that have been allocated to them by the Malawian government. And that is where they're trying to find shelter. But really, the shelter that we're talking about here is not real shelter as we know. These are people who are sharing one huge tent, which does not actually accommodate all of them. So there is totally a lack of resources here to try to help these people who have lost so much in the few days and weeks as we've seen floods devastate their areas here. Okay, thank you, Daniel. We will return to you in a moment. That's Daniel Arap Moi in Malawi. We now have Angelo Coppola. You're on your way to Mozambique's Beira city, which has been cut off from the rest of the country by this cyclone Idai. What more can you tell us about the situation where you are or where you're heading to?
Well, Karen, it's quite simple. As of late yesterday afternoon, we understand that the president flew over the Beira area in a small plane to kind of assess what the situation was from the air. He got back. He then reported on state radio that the death toll would be far from the 84 people that are currently confirmed passed away from the flooding in the area. And they're looking at numbers closer to 1,000 and perhaps even higher. So it's kind of escalated very quickly, based on an aerial view of what's actually going on the ground, because the aid agencies can't get into Beira itself because all the roads are basically washed away. The last road that was open on Sunday, there was a dam wall that burst and it took that road out. So as it stands right now, we have 84 confirmed deaths. We have issues with aid agencies trying to get into Beira city itself. There are some local I guess you would call them international Red Cross agents working on the ground. They're waiting for their colleagues to come in, but they're all facing the same issue. Unless they've got planes or choppers to bring them into Beira, they're going to have to wait until that water subsides so they can actually go in and help. So as it stands right now, that death toll is set to climb dramatically in the next couple of days as that water recedes. Karen.
Okay, Angelo in Beira City. We shall return to you in a moment. Let's now go back to Daniel Arap Moi, who is in Malawi. What has the government done to prepare for this?
Well, the government of Malawi is trying very hard to mobilize resources to help the affected communities, families in the southern part of the country. Now, yesterday we visited a place called Nsanje that is down south towards the border with Mozambique. And the president of the country was speaking to some of the affected people. And he did tell them that the government will, as soon as possible, respond to their plight and send in relief items. And indeed, yesterday we saw a few trucks that were sent in with food items on board, but it wasn't yet ready for distribution. So we do hope that in the next few days, people here will start receiving relief items from the government. But of course, it is still very challenging for aid agencies because some of the areas are still inaccessible. So aid agencies can't actually get to the ground to try to help people, though a few aid agencies have tried to come in and help those that are affected. But the government says it's doing so. And in some areas that we've seen, the government is trying to construct bridges and roads that were washed away by the flood waters. So that is so far what we are seeing. But the biggest challenge that people are finding here is something to do with shelter. Accommodation is simply a problem here. People are sleeping in the open. So we hope that aid agencies will in the few coming days and weeks, perhaps, will be able to send in the much-needed relief item to help the people that are stranded here in Malawi's southern region.
Okay, thank you. That was Daniel Arap Moi there in Malawi. We are now going to return to Angelo Coppola. You were talking about earlier aid agencies helping there. Well, South Africa has reacted by sending help and rescue teams into Beira. What more can we expect from South Africa?
Well, look, that small team of National Defence Force people have gone in to offer logistical and humanitarian aid support there. So it's a small group. We understand it's around 10 people. The government hasn't committed anything else just yet. There was a meeting planned between the country's two defence ministers today. That's been cancelled, probably so that the Mozambican defence minister can take care of some aid issues happening there. We do understand that the South African-based Gift of the Givers aid agency landed its personnel in Maputo on Sunday night, early Monday morning. They're trying to make their way up towards Beira, but they're facing the same issues with roads that are being washed away the closer they get to Beira. And that's going to be an issue going forward. The local or South African international relations minister has called for South Africans to donate food and clothing and bedding so that can be taken up to those people who are in dire need right at this minute. And we do understand that rain is either falling or is forecast to carry on falling, which is just going to make matters even worse. Karen.
Okay, thank you very much. That was CGTN's Angelo Coppola in Limpopo, South Africa, talking about Mozambique. Earlier, of course, we spoke to Farai Mwakatuya in Chimanimani in Zimbabwe, and also Daniel Arap Moi in Chikwawa in Malawi. Moving on to other news now. Ethiopian air crash investigators have returned to Addis Ababa from France, where they reviewed the black box data from the Boeing 737 MAX 8. The plane crashed last week, killing all 157 people on board, prompting regulators to ground the model to investigate the cause of the tragedy. So far, authorities have said that initial data reveals that the crash bears clear similarities with a Lion Air accident of the same model that happened in October last year. Data from the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder are now believed to be in the capital, Addis Ababa. Well, CGTN's Gurum Chala joins us now for more on that. Ethiopian air crash investigators, they have returned to Addis Ababa from Paris. Have they said anything on the investigations yet?
Well, Karen, so far we don't have any official report from these investigators. As you've said, they have returned to Addis Ababa from Paris, and a preliminary report has been released by the Ethiopian Minister of Transport. The minister, Dagmar Mogash, has talked about similarities between Lion Air crash and that of Ethiopian Airlines crash of the 737 -8 plane. Now, let's talk about similarities. What does that mean? If you remember the October crash of Java River of Lion Air, it was blamed that there's a technical issue with that plane. And to be more specific, automatic anti-stalling system repeatedly forced the plane nose down, and it crashed it at the end of the day. So if we are talking of similarities, this could be one. That's what experts are telling us. But at the end of the day, we don't exactly know which similarities the transport minister is talking about, and we're waiting for any news from her.
So we know that there are striking similarities, or it seems to be that way. Has Boeing said anything about this, or the FAA?
Well, we have seen reports from Boeing talking about how safety is important. The president, there is a report going on social media and also through our emails that Boeing is going to give the utmost care for its customers, and some of the regrets that it was its president was talking about because of the grounding of the 737s by most of the airliners across the world. But Boeing is insisting at the moment that the official report should be waited for, and we are going to also suggest something about it. They said their experts are assisting Ethiopian Airlines investigators or other international investigators at the same time, but officially there is nothing they have said about the outcome of that black box investigation result. similarly, we're waiting to hear from Boeing in this regard as well.
Okay, thank you for that update. That was CGTN's Giram Chalat there. Well, as Giram was saying, a preliminary review of the data recovered from the black boxes of the Ethiopian plane Boeing 737 MAX 8 shows similarities to the crash of the same model in Indonesia in October last year. The Ministry of Transport says more information from investigations will continue to be released in the next few days.
Ethiopian Flight 302 was bound for Nairobi before it crashed, killing all 157 people on board.
As we all know, the accident is a devastating one, as we all remember. It is not something that you can deal with easily.
Initial analysis of the data collected from 2 black boxes recovered from the crashed plane reportedly showed clear similarities with last October's Lion Air crash in Indonesia. Both planes were Boeing 737 MAX 8s, and both crashed minutes after takeoff after pilots reported flight control problems. They are said to have experienced erratic steep climbs and descents, as well as fluctuating airspeeds before crashing shortly after takeoff.
There are indications that there are clear similarities, especially with the number of minutes they spent after takeoff. But with the news revelations, it is better to pose the questions to the relevant authorities, as I am doing right now here.
Flight recorders from the latest crash are in the hands of France's Bureau of Investigation and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety. The BEA said it sent a download voice document to Ethiopian investigators. A preliminary report is expected to be issued in 30 days.
The problem is that there are individual requests from victims, families and media. In the context of this devastating accident that we got, it is not possible to sit the whole day long and give statements. Of course, it is essential to give updates at each stage, and I do not believe that we have been short of that.
Concern over the plane's safety caused aviation authorities worldwide to ground the model. The crash has generated one of the most widely watched and high-stakes probes. The latest version of Boeing's profitable 737 workhorse also depending heavily on the outcome. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Well, the Boeing company has grounded the 737 MAX 8 aircraft, and it continues to roll off the production line at the United States Planemakers factory near to Seattle, Washington. Completed aircraft, although grounded by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration following the 2 crashes, are permitted to fly between Boeing facilities for testing or other scenarios. Boeing confirmed that suspension of deliveries of the model, but continues to produce its single-aisle jets. The company said it planned to maintain its production rate of 52 aircraft per month. However, a pause in deliveries may soon pose a challenge. According to estimates, each month that the planes are grounded could cost Boeing around $1.8 billion to $2.5 billion in delayed revenue. Well, we are going to a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including France opens dialogue with Algeria on new leadership. And UN envoy calls for the formation of new government in DR Congo.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
President Emmanuel Macron says France has begun talks with Algeria regarding its transition to a new government. It comes after Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika reversed his decision to stand for a fifth term and postponed presidential elections due in April. France remains cautious about events in the country with which it has a complicated relationship. Let's now take a look.
Algerian protesters have taken to the streets for the fourth consecutive week. They're demanding that President Bouteflika relinquish power and for the army not to interfere. France has begun conducting dialogues with Algeria regarding its government transition. Speaking to academics at a grand debate in the LZ Palace, President Macron stressed the importance for France not to overstep its bounds.
There are constant exchanges between France and Algeria to accompany Algeria during a sort of transition of leaders. My counterparts are themselves leaders. In any case, if I let myself be persuaded by the people protesting in the streets, I would be committing a fundamental error towards them. Doing so would be a disservice to the country and would be reopening a debate that we know by heart regarding French-Algerian relations, which is the debate on political meddling. So I kept my distance from this topic.
Macron is planning to organize an inter-Mediterranean summit in June to strengthen European-Maghreb relations. The summit of the two coasts aims to bring together voices from government, the youth and civil society. The French leader also hopes the proposed summit can help heal fractures and renew dialogue in the region.
It's nothing new to have Mediterranean political relations. It's about relations that are written in the sand, pardon the pun, with regard to the conflicts of the Near and Middle East, the divisions within Europe. The idea is to have a summit of 5 countries from Mediterranean Africa plus 5 countries from Mediterranean Europe.
Macron's speech comes a day after a state news agency reported that the newly appointed Algerian Prime Minister has started talks to form a new government. Many Algerians are hoping for a younger generation of leaders who can create jobs and stamp out corruption. Tlanela Lupuana, CGTN.
The special representative and head of the UN stabilization mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo is pushing for the establishment of a new government. Leila Zerouki argued that for a government to meet the expectations of the Congolese people, it has to be in place. She urged the United Nations to support the government in its efforts to promote unity and stability. DR Congo government and opposition agreed last week on the next appointment of a Prime Minister of the Republic. For the first time in history, DRC had a peaceful transfer of power. President Félix Tshisekedi was sworn in January, taking over the presidency from Joseph Kabila.
We must support the government in its efforts to honor the expectation of the Congolese population, to advance political dialogue and collaboration, and to seize the opportunities which we are now seeing for a sustainable reduction of armed groups in some areas.
Mon pays sollicite auprès de la communauté internationale.
My country calls on the international community to support this process of voluntary disarmament so that the combatants who surrendered their arms to the authorities can benefit from the necessary support framework to ensure their social reintegration. In this context, my country is calling for the inclusion of DDR in the new MONUSCO mandate and calls upon DDR as the second strategic priority after the protection of civilians in the new mandate.
Authorities in the Nigerian commercial city of Lagos have begun a massive demolition of buildings around the area where a 3-story building collapsed last week, killing 20 people. Most of the dead were school children. Their school was on one of the floors in the collapsed building. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with more.
The government promised swift action in the wake of the collapsed building in the heart of the city last week, and it's living out its words. Men of the Lagos State Building Control Agency pulling down a building that has long been marked for demolition. Several of the buildings in the area had long been marked for demolition, but for some reasons, the demolition notices were never executed in the past. Last week's collapse of a 3-story building housing a private school is what has now triggered this action. Well, the State Building Control Agency has marked 145 buildings like this that would be going down in the coming days. In fact, according to officials of the agency, 3 buildings will be brought down each day. It's of course a lot of work, but this time they are determined that all the weak buildings around this community must come down. And one after the other, the marked buildings are coming down, changing the landscape of this notoriously congested part of Lagos. Some of the residents, though, say they were not given enough time to move out, a claim denied by the agency.
If there is a notice before the demolition, we'll have now decided where to go. But now there is nowhere we can now go now.
We have been given adequate notices, demolition, contravention notice, letters to carry out the NTD, non-destructive tests, foundation probing, series of notices.
This part of Lagos is not only notorious for its weak buildings, builders here hardly comply with the city's building codes and standards. Most of the building collapse in the city happens around here, and for a long time, the city's authorities turned a blind eye to the issue. This building, for instance, was marked for demolition 10 years ago, and it's only now that the building agency is executing the demolition.
It's better for us to leave than the building to collapse on its own. So no problem, we're happy about that. We've been saying what are they waiting for. In fact, after this period of Etafaji incident, all eyes has been in this house.
As they come for the demolition, we are very happy about it, because as this building stands, it stands like dead trap for many residents. So that is it.
The government has now confirmed that 20 persons died and 45 got injured when the 3-story building sitting on this parcel of land collapsed last week. The land has now been taken over by the government, while the search for the developer of the building continues. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The Chinese People's Liberation Army has organized a major photo exhibition and reception at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. During the event, Senior Colonel Mao Naiguo said the Chinese army and government will continue working towards peacekeeping efforts on the continent. CGTN's Grimchala has more.
Since 1990, the Chinese People's Liberation Army has participated in 24 peacekeeping operations across the world, and over 39,000 PLA peacekeeping military personnel have been dispatched to execute their duties. 13 Chinese have lost their lives while in action. Some of those sacrifices by the Chinese army were paid here in Africa. Aimed at showcasing China's commitment to global peace throughout history, and as a sign of redoubling PLA's efforts towards supporting peacekeeping operations in Africa and elsewhere in the world, a photo exhibition has opened at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
We have come here to showcase this exhibition aiming at expressing more solidarity with the African Union and the African continent in general. We also intend to send out to the world a clear message that PLA will always be in support of African countries and is a force standing by to assist to keep the African security.
The Chinese army has already contributed in 16 peacekeeping operations in Africa, and at the moment there are more than 2,000 Chinese soldiers in Africa carrying out peacekeeping missions across the continent. Africa appreciates.
China has proven to be a valuable partner to Africa. Over the past 2 decades in particular, China has provided critical support to Africa in all areas, including in the area of peace and security, which has been focused on supporting the African vision of African solutions to African problems.
Whether it is here in Africa and in the rest of the world, China wants to be an active actor for peace. Through this 5 days open exhibition and as a message, the head of the Chinese People's Liberation Army communications team says all is done under serious observation of the UN's charter.
We support the center role being played by the United Nations. Actually, we always act and carry out missions under the framework of the United Nations, and we shall continue doing so.
It's obvious Africa still needs the support of the Chinese army to help it curb some of the remaining security-related problems. But the AU has also officially asked the Chinese government to deeply involve in mediation efforts exerted throughout the continent. Experts say that particular request of the AU shows an ever-growing trust and confidence it has on China. Group data CGTN at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
All the business news coming up, including Egypt hosts the fastest growth in tourism ahead of the global average. And Russian diamond producer Alrosa eyes 51% stake in Zimbabwe mine.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Travel and tourism in Egypt grew by 16.5% in 2018. According to the research by the World Travel and Tourism Council, this was much faster than the global average of 3.9%. The council says the growth was as a result of improvements in security. The WTTC's 2018 research, which compared travel and tourism sectors in 185 countries, also show that travel and tourism are responsible for 9.5% of all Egypt's employment. This accounts for 2.5 million jobs. The travel and tourism sector also contributed 11.9% of the North African country's GDP in 2018 and is expected to grow a further 5.4% in 2019. Russia's state-controlled miner Alrosa says it will assess the quality of Zimbabwe's diamond reserves, but will only start mining if it can gain 51% control of the project. The world's top diamond producer by output plans to develop exploration and extraction operations in the country. Zimbabwe is seeking to attract investments and plans to scrap legislation that restricts foreign control in some commodities. The government selected Alrosa and China's Anjin Investments to partner its state diamond company. Most of the country's diamond fields are in Marange, in eastern Zimbabwe, where production is dominated by the state-owned Zimbabwe Consolidated Diamond Company. The diamond producing firm managed to surpass its set target of 2.4 million carats with output of 2.8 million carats in 2018. Boeing's CEO has moved to reassure clients of the firm's commitment to safety amid intense scrutiny following the Ethiopian Airlines plane crash. The airline's Boeing 737 MAX 8 crashed in Addis Ababa, killing 157 people. 6 months prior to that crash, a Lion Air jet of the same type crashed, killing 189 people. This has raised questions on whether Boeing delayed correcting a fault in its plane's MCAS anti-stalling system. The company is set to release a software update and roll out a pilot training program for the 737 MAX to address these concerns in the aftermath.
The tragic losses of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 and Lion Air Flight 610 affect us all, and we join the world with heavy hearts in grieving. When an accident happens, for any reason, we focus relentlessly to determine why. We're united with our airline customers, international regulators, and government authorities in our efforts to support the most recent investigation, understand the facts of what happened, and help prevent future tragedies.
The British government's plans for Brexit have been thrown into further confusion by a controversial ruling from Parliamentary Speaker John Bercow. The Speaker cited a centuries-old convention to block Prime Minister Theresa May from putting the EU withdrawal plan before the House of Commons for a third time. Richard Bestick reports now from London.
The Prime Minister's Brexit deal had already been twice overwhelmingly rejected by Parliament. Britain's beleaguered Premier struggling to drum up the numbers needed to get a third attempt over the line. Locked in intensive talks with those lined up against her, the last thing Theresa May needed was a surprise intervention by Speaker John Bercow. Citing precedents dating back to 1604, he told Parliament the government couldn't just bring the same old deal back time and again in one session unless it substantially changed.
This ruling should not be regarded as my last word on the subject. It is simply meant to indicate the test which the government must meet in order for me to rule that a third meaningful vote can legitimately be held in this parliamentary session. Order.
All this on the eve of May's trip to Brussels to ask a summit of European Union leaders for an extension to Brexit beyond the March 29th deadline. It's more than just embarrassing for the Prime Minister. It leaves her in a position where the EU may insist Brexit is put on hold for anything up to 2 years, while the UK sorts itself out, effectively kicking the entire Brexit project deep into the long grass. As for John Bercow, well, the backlash has begun, with accusations the Speaker's ruling is breaking the British Constitution. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has ordered the National Petroleum Corporation to take over the controversial oil mining lease 11 from Shell Petroleum Development Company. OML 11, one of the most important oil blocks in the West African state, lies in the southeastern Niger Delta and contains 33 oil and gas fields. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports.
Ogoni land in Nigeria's Niger Delta region is home to oil block codenamed OML 11. Altogether, there are about 33 oil fields in the area, but only 8 were operational till 2017. Shell was responsible for operating most of them until 1993, when environmental activists led by Ken Saro-Wiwa forced it to shut down over environmental pollution. But even as it denied responsibility for the oil spills, Shell recently paid more than $100 million to commence initial phase of the cleanup in the region. It's expected to cost billions of dollars and take decades to restore the environment there. But locals in the area have refused to allow Shell resume oil mining in the area unless the cleanup is complete.
You know, since about 1993, thereabout, there have been issues of shutdown of Shell operations in Ogoni land because of the environmental pollution. And for some time, since the cleanup process started, there has been effort by companies to resume, but the opposition to Shell remains strong.
President Muhammadu Buhari has been talking economic diversification. He wants Nigeria to depend less on oil as global oil prices become more volatile. But he needs oil money to achieve that. It means Nigeria's production must hit maximum capacity in a short time. The Petroleum Ministry says it wants to hit export capacity of 2.3 million barrels per day, but it has barely sustained production at 1.8 million barrels in the past years. Ogoni land has been relatively peaceful, but with redundant reserves. And it could be a reason why the government sees it as the quickest way to increase output.
We're going 2.2, you do 2.8, 1.8. So anywhere where you can peacefully explore, especially when investment has already gone in. You're not starting afresh, you're not looking for oil. You just want to go back and start operating and extracting.
Nigeria's government is the majority shareholder in Ogoniland's oil fields. It holds up to 55% stakes. Shell, with other entities, own the remaining shares. Shell has refused to comment on the directive. Industry observers say President Buhari's directive does not hurt Shell's interest. It just takes away the responsibility of mining from the oil giant. It's unclear whether Shell will attempt to challenge the move once the decision is implemented in April. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
We're going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's go over to South Africa now, where the annual Cape Town Festival has celebrated multicultural pride for the 10th year running. Thousands line the streets to take part in the colourful parade. This is the third year that the local Chinese community is performing at the event with traditional lion and dragon dances. Let's now take a look.
The street parade was the highlight of this year's Cape Town Festival. This year's theme was Vuka Ukhanye, or Rise and Shine, calling for citizens to shake off limiting beliefs. Giant puppets, floats and dancers brought the streets to life, while thousands of spectators enjoyed traditional performances by the local Chinese diaspora.
It was amazing! Oh my goodness! It was amazing. I think as Cape Town we just need more cultural infusion from Asia. I think we just need more diversity, and I really, really love the Chinese floats. I love Chinese dragons, and it's just epic. It was epic. I loved it.
The Cape Town Festival is a fantastic opportunity for the overseas Chinese here. We're part of the local community, but we also want to showcase our culture. The festival is a platform where we can be proud of our heritage and share it with the world.
South Africa is home to one of the largest Chinese populations on the continent. Many of them have been in the country for several generations, looking for economic opportunities and eventually setting up businesses across South Africa.
There's a huge Chinese community, and they said that for the first time they feel like they really belong. So we've got a strong relationship with them, and they bring so much joy and happiness, and they're really part of our family.
China holds a very special place in the DNA of South Africa, because it was China which was part and parcel of helping the people of South Africa to fight apartheid to start with.
The event, embracing cultural diversity, is already in its 10th year. Organizers here hope for many more years that will draw thousands of spectators. Tonela Lupuwana, CGTN.
All the sports news coming up after the break, including the world's best squash players converge on Cairo for lucrative Black Ball Squash Open.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Egypt has witnessed the birth of a new international women's squash tournament. The Black Ball Squash Open saw a fierce competition between 24 of the world's top-ranking players. Two Egyptians have once again clashed in a new final. World's #1 Ranim El Waili and world